You should be seeing my presentation without any screens or anything hiding it. Is that correct? Yeah, I've got a couple of thumbs up. So we will still looking good, right? Yeah, good. Okay. So the topic in the Master Gardeners will say had some say in recommending topics that would be of interest to the community. And the question that we're going to address tonight is what to plant. Choosing the plants, choosing your seed packets, and so I got to thinking about this topic when it was suggested. It could be pretty broad. To be quite honest with you, it could be pretty broad. We could spend an entire session talking about the variety of tomatoes you have to choose from and the pros and the cons. The thing is, and we've done a few tomato tastings in the past with Master Gardeners and others. Everybody likes a different tomato. Some like a big, nice slicing tomato. Some like a nice juicy. Some like it firm. Some like it sweet. So the variety, I'm just going to say that's going to be up to your all's taste, whether we're talking tomatoes, sweet corn, the type of pepper. I am not going to grow any hot chilies. It's just, I don't like anything hot. That's just not me. But bell pepper, sweet banana pepper. But you may want the hottest tomatoes or peppers out there in your garden. So a lot of the variety choices is going to be preference and your taste. And to some degree, just a little trial and error. Experiment with some of the varieties that's out there. I will say, if you're starting to get your gardening catalogs, that there's a lot of cool stuff that is being advertised, and they always put their latest and the supposedly greatest out front. I might not buy 100 of those plants, but you might try one if it's something you're not sure about. So, what to plant variety wise, that would really be up to you as an individual. So, and I actually have already covered most of this, but how would you select what the varieties are and what you would want from a variety standpoint? Well, my grandpa always grew, and you fill in the blank. That may be something you would want to grow. Kennebec potatoes in my case. Uh, Silver Queen corn. What have I grown in the past that I've had success with and that did really well for me? Those are a couple of things to keep in mind. As you read through your catalogs, look at the seed packets, try to make your decisions, you're going to see that there, and we'll look at this a little closer, disease resistant codes that are listed, particularly with tomatoes and some other crops. The more disease resistance they have, probably the better they're going to be as far as less care. You may not have to treat or spray. Some of the heirlooms that are really good tomatoes, for example, they might not be as disease resistant as some of the newer cultivars. That being said, if you want to grow some of the heirlooms, just realize that they may take a little more diligence and work. Um, and that's just something to consider. Do I really like the taste of that sweet corn and that variety of sweet corn? Or do I really like this tomato? His appearance, well, maybe, maybe not. Sometimes your garden grown varieties may not look the prettiest like they would be at the farmer's market, particularly as they would be at a grocery store, but they still taste good. There might be some other things to that you would add to this as to why you would select a particular variety. When it comes to such things as, am I going to eat fresh out of the garden and not preserve? Am I going to can, freeze, or have other, you know, preservate preserving some of these different crops? Then I might look at a different variety, particularly with tomatoes. With tomatoes, you have determinate. They grow to a determined size, set fruit, all at one time. So you'll harvest all the fruit at one time, which is great for canning. But the tomatoes done. The indeterminate varieties, as long as you keep them healthy, watered, and the hornworms don't eat them up, you'll have tomatoes until frost. So that's something to think about. But you'll only get a tomato today and maybe one day after tomorrow. So it's great for eating, but not necessarily for freezing. So think about why you're growing. It may make a difference. Something else to think about with variety is space. How big can those plants get? Some of the indeterminate tomatoes can get to be pretty good size. Some of the determinate, they're, as I said, they reach a certain size, they reach a certain stage, set fruit, and they're done. So they might not take up as much space. If you are looking at raised beds or even containers, there are some varieties of vegetables and crops that are starting to show up in the catalogs that are a little more compact and a little more suitable for those small spaces. So, several things to think about when you select a variety. And as I already noted, disease resistance can be pretty critical, and particularly with tomatoes, beans. So look carefully at the disease package in those different varieties. Now, you can find several recommendations from different places. We're going to look in depth at one in here in a few minutes, but there is something called All American Selections. And these are plants. And when I say plants because they have flowers, they have vegetables, fruit crops that have demonstrated desirable characteristics and over a large part of the U.S., not just in a particular region. That being said, that still doesn't mean it's the best variety or the best for your situation. But it's a good place to start and to think about. Talk to your neighbors. What have they had the most luck growing? What have they had the major failures with? So what's the neighbors doing? And I've already noted some of the older cultivars really have those desirable qualities and taste and maybe even some sentimental value that we would want, but they don't always have the disease resistance, so it can be a little more challenging in caring for them. So the other place to look is something called the Tennessee Home Variety Trials. In the Tennessee Home Variety Trials, if you go to UT Hort, in fact, just Google UT Hort, and you will find the University of Tennessee's horticulture page. Anything and everything about garden and landscape plants that you need to know is there. And if you go through their publications, you can find their home variety trials. And I am definitely going to go in depth with this in a few minutes because of the way they've laid out their trial results. But they go back a few years. And you can even see what counties have participated in those trials. They don't tell you exactly what was plants were in what counties for trials because there is a long list that the participants in those trials can choose from, and they don't all choose the same packet of plants to trial. But we do have folks in the county that have helped with these trial gardens and tried some of these varieties, and they score them on a variety of characteristics to kind of help you make a decision as to what you might choose. In fact, those are by gardeners. So when you look at some of the data that they collect, one is what did they like about it? Do they like the taste? Do they like the looks of it? So it's more than just how well did it grow, the matrix of just simply measuring the plant, assessing it for disease and insect damage. They're actually asking them for their input. So here I'm going to try this. That means I'm going to have to shift my share for just a second. So stop share, share again, and this time you should be seeing a chart for varieties. There it goes. You see a chart for variety? Yes. All right. So this is, scroll back to the last year's. I say last year's, it's 25 has not come out yet. This is the last year that we have variety trial results. Brief description of what they do and how they do it. All the green counties, you can see Sequatchie County had participants, and then a summary of these results. So for this year trial, they tried two varieties of bush beans, and it looks like the Buff Valentine was the best. Why? Because of its size, its health, its appearance. It was a good yielding variety, a lot better than the other variety that they were comparing it to, even though 81 is actually a good score. I think 70 above is when it really, they like to put it on our list of recommended varieties. So they both did well. There's a pole bean variety, Blue Lake. You notice Blue Lake's one of those that a lot of folks like to grow, but this other variety, actually, everyone that grew it liked it for various reasons. So it actually outdid one of the more common varieties grown in the state and in the area. So this might be, if you're growing pole beans, you might want to try the variety list here. And we can go through all of these. There's okra, vining cucumbers, and they uh, they had slicer tomatoes this time, green zucchini. They try different things every year. But the thing that comes down to the end, give me a second. Here is a summary of different varieties going back to 2020, maybe a little before in the trials. So if you were raising zucchini, well, here's one, two, oh, zinnias. Let's not do zinnias. Let's do bush beans. There's one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight varieties of bush beans that have done well in the trials they have done. So you can go through this and find all kinds of good information. As I said, we could talk all day on the different varieties for each of these that's listed. They've got 3 corn varieties here. Couple, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Well, long list of cucumbers. Gourds, kale, lettuce, and it tells you why. What what about that particular variety did they really like? I'm opening up the 2023 results. It's actually laid out a little different. And one of the things I wanted to show about it is it actually has a year or two earlier. But when you scroll down to the to this list, it actually has years evaluated. So if it's been multiple years evaluated, then then 2 year and it's bold, then in both years it scored high in both evaluations. So this Clemson spineless, it has done well every time it's been in the trials. But you scroll down here to a pumpkin in 2018, it didn't do very well in the trials for some reason, but in 2020 it did. And here's the thing that I noted from this. Why did it not do well 1 year and 2 years later? It actually had 100% of the on the score that recommended it the second year, where only half the first year. What happened? Well, we could think of a lot of possibilities. One of them, it's the second year was blind, so they may not have known what it was. The other thing is, what was the difference in weather in 2018 and 2020? And it may very well be that it was too dry for it or too wet for it in 2018. So while these results can help us pick varieties, they don't always guarantee that you'll have a good year every year because the weather, you may end up with some insect or disease that kind of come along unexpected. So other things can happen that keep you from having the success. Now, if you try a variety and you just don't like the way it looks, tastes, and then yeah, you can move on. But think about what happened and do I want to give this variety another trial? Here's a green zucchini, 3 years in a row, good scores. And then green zucchini down here in 17, it got a 71% recommendation, but the next year it didn't reach that threshold. Again, what was it being compared to in this case? But also maybe what happened weather-wise. So a lot of information here for you to consider. So you can come up with a list of possibilities of varieties based on these recommendations. And then you can take that information and start looking at the seed catalogs, looking at the information that you have about those varieties and finding out more about them and whether or not it's something you would want to try. So I mentioned this website. This is where all that information can be found, uthort.com. And there's over here in the drop-down menu, there's in the right-hand corner, you'll find a list of publications where you can find these trials. Okay, so we've decided we want to look at Cherokee Purple, Big Boy, Early Girl, and tomato varieties. So we start looking at the catalog and we start reading those catalogs, and there's going to be terms and bits of information that will make sure you know what they mean. One of the things you're going to find is on seed catalog and on seed packets, and even with some of the transplants in the descriptions in the catalog, number of days to harvest. So this is the time that it would take for that plant from being transplanted, if it's a transplant, or if it's seed from the time it went in the ground, that you can expect a harvest. It'll give you a range, and that's all dependent upon soil temperature at the time of planting, how much moisture is in the ground, how well you keep it watered, does it have the nutrients that it needs. So there's going to be a few things that might delay or even speed up that process just a little. So if you've got a really good site, good soil, everything's good and looking good, then you might be on the short end of that time frame. Where if if something happens and it's a little dry for a week or so, then it might be a week or so delayed. So keep that in mind. The seeds, maybe if it's a seed packet, maybe started directly in the ground, or it may recommend that you transplant. So if it says direct sowing, then it's perfectly fine to take it to the garden or the raised bed and put it where it's going to be for this season. This to be done after the last chance of a killing frost. The packets may say you could do that, give it a week or so uh, before the last frost and sow some things. But read carefully. It'll tell you if you can directly seed it and when's the best time to directly seed it. So if you're going to uh, start indoors, the packet will give you some recommendations. Typically, it's recommended you do so under lights or even in a greenhouse. Starting them in a window, unless you plan to turn them regularly, a couple of times a day or more, that can be a problem. So good light is really important. And then once those transplants are ready, they can be moved outdoors and moved outdoors once the threat of frost has passed. So you can move them and be ready. Okay, it's not advancing. There it goes. You're going to find there we go. You're going to find on the packet, it'll tell you if it's open pollinated. Open pollinated, these are pollinated by another plant as opposed to being self-pollinated. Uh, these varieties, some of these would come from true seed. And if you want to save seed, then you would need one that is open pollinated. And most of your heirloom varieties are open pollinated. So these are the varieties that will come true from seed. So if that's something let's go back to considerations for picking a variety. If you want to be one who saves seed from year to year, then you want to choose an open thing. I have a question in the chat. Where's the symbol? Uh,
Yeah, your slide, this is Vicky Patterson. Your slide says look for this symbol, but we don't see the symbol. What are we looking for?
oh, uh, it will. There's a symbol, and I'll have to. It didn't get put on the slide, did it? It's okay. It's going to be two flowers with little pollen specks above it, and a butterfly or a bee, some pollinator. It's just going to be a little symbol that shows that it's open pollinated. There's also um, basically a little badge that has a picture of a plant that says open pollinated. And badge will actually say open pollinated. Um, the they may use the abbreviations OP, open pollinated as well. So they a couple of different ways they do it, but most of them will also say as well as have a little symbol of flowers and a pollinator on the packets. So reading the label is probably going to be one of the best things you could do to make sure you're getting what you want. Now, open pollinated is coming back true every year, but you're going to find some varieties that are marked as hybrid. And these are crosses between at least two, maybe more known varieties. The idea here is to find the characteristics of the varieties we're crossing with that we want and hopefully have a stronger disease resistance, better fruit, just a stronger, healthier plant. These will not come back true from seed. And you may find that it has on the packet, it may say hybrid F1. So that's take two known open pollinated varieties, cross them, and that's your first generation. And that's the hybrid that you'll be planting. If it's an F2, then they've taken those crosses and a cross from somewhere else or a third variety, and for the second generation brought it into the cross. So the seed cannot be saved from these. In some cases, it may look absolutely nothing like the seed, the plant that you took the seed from. So these hybrids do have some advantages for disease resistance and for vigor. So that's something to consider. Now, and I keep going back to tomatoes because one, that's it seems everyone likes to grow in tomatoes, but also one where we can find a lot of variety in what's available. And some of the gardeners that I've worked with, they grow a few of the heirloom varieties because they really like the taste. But they also choose a couple of hybrid varieties because of the volume of tomatoes they would produce, so they can have some then to can. So they have different reasons for growing different varieties. And look at disease resistance. There's going to be a long list of letter codes on the packet of seed if you're buying seed, or in the catalog for the different plants that you're considering. And each of those letters stand for a disease. And there's a key to the in the catalogs, but most of those are pretty standard. For example, a V is for verticillium wilt. So the more of those letters they have, the more resistant they are to different diseases. And I would suggest you check what those abbreviations mean against the catalog in particular that you're considering, just to make sure that that you know what you have and what you're considering. Now, this is disease resistance. It's not necessarily immunity. You know, we get flu shots this time of year to help with resistance, but they will tell you you're not going to be immune to the flu. Might be a slight variant out there that would come along and be you know cause you to be sick. Just because there's disease resistant doesn't mean you need to do your due diligence to keep the plant healthy with making sure this has the nutrients it needs, that it's well watered. In the case of tomatoes, maybe trained or trellised. And there's a lot of other things you would need to do to ensure that that plant is healthy. And it even says resistance could be compromised under high disease pressure and under extreme stresses. So just as a quick side note, we would actually cover this in another topic a little later in the season. But if you start seeing diseased plants and you know you've got good resistance, the one that's starting to be sick might need to just simply be removed and give the others a chance to to fight off before it gets too high of disease pressure and causing you all kinds of problems. All right, you may find the term heirloom listed in the catalogs or on a seed packet, and these are, as noted, open pollinated varieties. And these are typically plants that have been passed down through generations. They've been around a while. They tend to be, in a lot of cases, they used to be regional favorites. They tend to have a unique flavor, taste, color, and often fun to try and grow. But again, they can have some poor disease resistance when compared to the hybrids and even some of the newer open pollinated varieties. But you can save the seed from harvest after harvest and enjoy them from year to year. So you'll also find if you're buying seed, the seed may say treated. And treated seed can be treated with fungicides or insecticides to protect them from disease and other pests, uh, particularly at germination and the early stages of its growth. And typically, those treated seed have a color added to them. I get, I can remember planting beans that were pink. I mean, a bright pink color because they'd been treated. So it would definitely be an unusual color for that particular seed if they had been treated. You may find that beans in particular may say treated or even inoculated. And inoculated means that it's had a beneficial fungi coated as a part of the seed coating, which would help beans, which are legumes, to grow better. If you've grown beans in a garden for several years, you probably won't need an inoculant. But if you've never grown beans in that site, it might be a good idea to see if you can find some that is inoculated. I've already mentioned this, determinate plants, particularly a habit of tomato plants. And it will be mentioned on the packet or in the catalog. Uh, all the fruit mature usually within about a week or so, maybe 2 weeks of the fruit starting to set. So these are great for those who want to put up tomatoes for the winter. If you like making soups and sauces, you might look at having a determinate plant in your garden. And again, I already said they don't get as big, so they're really good for small spaces and container gardens. It'll also say if it's an indeterminate. Just keep growing until something kills it. Hopefully it's frost. And these are the vining type. They tend to run and will need to have some type of support system. On your seed packets, as you make your choices, you'll find it'll tell you the number of seed or the amount of seed that is in the packet. And may even tell you how long of a row that would actually plant based on the plant spacing recommended on the packet. So you can buy seed, just a handful in little envelopes, or you can buy big packets of seed. So I would suggest when you thinking about ordering or picking up a pack of seed that you buy enough to get you through a season, because storing seed, if you can do that, sometimes the second season they're still viable, but the longer they're in storage, the more likely they are to lose viability. So if you're buying seed, might be a good idea just to buy what you need. Or if it's a lot cheaper for you to buy a slightly bigger pack and your neighbor grows the same thing, maybe you just need to share. But I guess the point is, the longer the seed sets or in store and is in storage, the less likely you are for it to germinate. And if you're certainly just ended up putting a rubber band around it or stapling it closed, a clothespin on the envelope to hold it closed and tossing it on the shelf somewhere, you're less likely to have it survive and be viable another year. On several of the plants, it's going to tell you how quickly it's going to mature. So you might see something that says it's an early season or a mid-season or a late season maturity. This simply tells you when to expect it to be yielding fruit in relation to the actual growing season. And that's something else to keep in mind when you're selecting varieties, maybe such as tomatoes, particularly determinate tomatoes. You may pick a few varieties of or a variety that's an early maturing tomato that's going to come and then have a mid-season. So hopefully you'll have a little break from picking tomatoes and canning tomatoes, and then maybe even some late season. So you can space out your tomato harvest by choosing either an early, mid, or late season variety. Most packets will tell you how much will be yielded per 100 foot of row. So when you're selecting a variety or you're making your choices on what you need, how much do you plan to want or how much do you want out of it? So you can consider, the yield and the potential yield in selecting your varieties. It's also going to talk about vernalization. And if you're particularly growing a plant starting indoors and then carrying it in and out, then that plant's going to be exposed to temperatures. And sometimes the exposing the plant to cold temperatures for specific lengths of time would induce flowering. So this really may depend on what you're growing, and this may even be the case with flowers, perennials. But the packet's also going to tell you, and the catalogs will tell you a little bit about how to care and make sure you have what you want. It's going to tell you if it's a monoecious plant, which means you've got male flowers and female flowers on the same plant. The cucurbits fall in this category. There's a male flower and there is a female flower. Male flower is pretty tiny. It's usually hidden a little back in the plant more so than the female flowers, which are a little larger and more prominent, and of course would set fruit. Dioecious, they can be a male and female plant. Now, this is not necessarily something to consider with most of the vegetables, annual vegetables that we grow in a garden. But if you're expanding on to just growing annual vegetables in your garden, there are some trees and some that fruits that persimmons that have male and female plants. So if you really want fruit, you're going to need to make sure that you have more than one plant. So there are plants that will produce only female flowers. So there definitely needs to be a plant with the male flowers to set fruit. So again, usually not a problem with annual vegetables, but something to think in mind as you're picking plants. And then there is those plants that do not necessarily require pollen to set fruit. And they're called parthenocarpic. These are seedless varieties of like seedless watermelons would fall into this category. It'll set the fruit, it just will not produce seed. So you can find seedless watermelons, seedless, usually melons of some kind. So they fall in this category. So as you're reading the catalogs or reading on seed packets, you may come across this term and just realize that you're probably looking at a seedless. went too far. Okay, real quick. When you're reading on the packets, you're looking at the seed catalogs. It's going to say this plant does well in hardiness zones 6 to 8. It might be even wider range than that. Well, we typically fall in the 7 and 8 category. If you're looking at this, the bottom down there about where the 8A is, which is actually the yellow color at the bottom center of the screen, that is actually in Marion County where I've got it covered. So you can see that zone 8A comes into almost Bledsoe County. 7B covers most of Sequatchie County and the lower elevations for the most part in Bledsoe County. That's the 7B, which is it gets a little colder. And then in the north end of Sequatchie County and along the higher parts of the Cumberland Plateau and Walden's Ridge in the north end of Bledsoe County and into Cumberland County, you're getting into the 7A. So 7A means that we can see temperatures from anywhere from 0 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit, 5 to 10 for the 7B, and 10 to 15. These are on average. If you go back, 2 years ago, this time 2 years ago, it's actually Martin Luther King Day because I was home. We got a few inches of snow, and then we definitely got colder than the 0, even at my house in zone 8A. So those poor folks out on the plateau and on the mountains around here, it got cold. Now, I don't think any of us would have tomato plants or vegetables out at that time. But we go back about 8, 10 years ago, we had some 10, 12 degree, we had about 20-degree weather around Easter. We had an Easter freeze. And there was a few folks that had started plants and had things out in their garden, particularly in the valley. And it got cold. So we can see some cold weather. So just keep in mind when you're selecting plants and it has a recommended hardiness zone, if you're in the valley, 7, 8 would be what you're looking at. If you're on the plateau, you're definitely in a zone 7. So, but think about that. I didn't have any pictures of seed catalogs, but with a different, but they have the nice little picture, a little paragraph description, and then a little chart that gives you some of the basic information. They're all laid out pretty much the same. And we went through those different terms and things to look at. But a seed package you may pick up in a garden store, and on the back in particular is the information you want. And we've got a couple of different things here. But if you look at the one on the left, at the top, it says this is Long Island Mammoth Deal. So it's deal, that's the plant. Long Island Mammoth, that's the variety. It says it could take it anywhere from 7 to 21 days to germinate. Now, why such a wide range? I mean, that's a week to 3 weeks. I think part of it may have to do with um, soil temperatures and moisture. So that it'll germinate. It'll sit there for a while until all the conditions are right. So just realize if you've got really good conditions, then it's going to germinate just a little quicker than if things are not perfect. You need to sow to about a 1/16 of an inch in depth, so basically barely covering that seed, spaced about 1 inch apart. And the smaller the seed, the harder it is to get that spacing. So if you read some of the further information, it recommends thinning. Row spacing, so you need a couple of feet between the rows. And it says that days to harvest is 65 to 70 days. So you could time your deal to when you you would be needing it. So if you're putting up pickles, and you can think about the timing. So you can see it's here the packet has four zones, and this is the company's planting recommendations, not hardiness zones. It is based to some degree on hardiness zones, but it says for zone 3, April to June, which is the green, which includes most of Tennessee except the extreme western part of the state, it looks like. So if you're in the valley, April, probably the latter part of April. If you're on the mountain, it's going to be May or June before you probably need to think about it. So, keep in mind that they're giving a broad sweep for the entire state of Tennessee in green from Johnson City to Memphis. And we know that there's a lot of variation in elevation and even north to south in this state. So think about where you are and just use that as a guide, realizing that I might need to be planning a little later if I'm in the higher elevations. It says sow in an average soil, and just a good soil. After the danger of spring frost, we'll get to that one in just a minute. Sow the seed indoors 6 to 8 weeks before you plant it outdoors. So it even gives you some idea as to when you can plant. So to give you an idea, let's say it's the 1st of May when I want to take it out on the mountain. So I back up 2 months. So we'll be sowing sometime in March to take it outside. So here we have on the other packet a slightly different way of presenting things. And it even tells you who the artist is who designed the packet. But it says it is an open pollinated seed that will remain true. So you know that you can save the seed. It describes it as Bloomsdale longstanding. So there's the variety. One thing is I don't know exactly what that would be without seeing the front. But it gives you a little bit of information and background on this reliable spinach variety since 1920. And it's wind pollinated annual. So you need to isolate by a couple of miles if you want it to be according to their recommendation. But you got information here. But down here on the bottom of this little tab is the same information that's found in the block. Seed spacing, seed depth, days to it sprouts, uh, mature size, number of days to harvest, and how many seeds you have in the packet. They're selling the packets by weight. Something else is this says packaged for sale by, and it has a sell by date. Here it's packaged for the 2016 season, so sell by November of 2016. So when you look at a seed packet, it's going to have that date stamp. What season was it packaged for? And that means you're getting seed that has been tested and is reliable for the season that it is stamped for. So, this 16 is 10-year-old seed. Would it grow? It might. Would I get the same stand that I would expect if it was the 2026 season? Probably not. However, I did try this one time with watermelons, and I don't have a clue how long the packet had been stuck in a drawer. It had more watermelons than I knew what to do with. So yes, they sometimes will survive if they've been handled properly. Just be careful. So let's talk. You've selected your variety. So let's get into this real quick. Something to think about with varieties when you're selecting those and the timing, how long it matures, how quickly it matures. Then you may think, well, I can start the tomatoes indoors. I may start my tomatoes indoors. So when you select those planting dates, think about your climate, exactly which crop and variety, how long it's going to be to maturity, and the length of that season. So you got cool season crops, some of which we will be planting here in about 6 weeks or so. Cool temperatures, to grow and mature. They can often stand a little frost. I'm not sure they can stand 0 degree, but they can handle that frost. They tend to be shallow rooted, so they need to be well watered. And they can be planted pretty early in the spring. Whereas we have those warm season crops, which really need to be warm, no threat of frost. Even a light frost can be, well, it can kill them. They tend to be a little deeper rooted and a little more drought resistant because they are adapted to those warmer, drier periods of time. But that still means we doesn't mean we need to water them. So keep in mind that watering is still going to be critical. So here's a quick chart of frost-free occurrence dates, and you can find these charts in various places. Um, but I went through and narrowed it down. So in the spring, Chattanooga says April 17th is the last possible frost date. Crossville, May 10th. In McMinnville, April 9th. Well, what does that mean? Well, if you are not in the valley, that May 10th is probably the date for the last frost. And this is the last chance for 50% chance of frost. Yeah. So, or no, wait. Some of those charts do have. So there's a less than a 10% chance for frost. So here in the valley, Sequatchie, Bledsoe County, even into Marion County, it's going to be somewhere between that April 9th and April 17th date. It may even be a little, if you're on the north end of the valley, April 20th or so. So, rule of thumb, if you are not in the valley, aim for Mother's Day weekend to plant your orange season. If you're in the valley, you can back up a couple of weeks and plant it. So that's a good rule of thumb. And if you think about it, that's going to be around the somewhere between the 10th and the 14th of May, which is that last actual frost potential day. Crossville can have frost the 1st of October, or at least the first week of October. McMinnville in that first week of October. Chattanooga, it's going to be late October. I didn't make a note this year as to when the first frost was, but we were seeing frost in oh, I don't know, second week in the valley anyway of October. Light frost, but enough to kill some things. So the question, so on Lewis Chapel, safe to plant on or after Mother's Day. Definitely don't want to plant before Mother's Day on the higher elevations. But I'm not going to say it's guaranteed to be safe. Never know with the weather around here sometimes. The other thing I want to suggest is find you a notebook or a calendar and make notes. One of the things, we grow these great tomatoes in the garden, and my brother's like, "Hey, this is a really great tomato. What was it?" I don't remember. I got it from so and so. I don't remember. So make notes and make notes so you can remember where and what you planted. But also make notes on frost dates. How much rain you've been getting might be something so you can know, I might need to water those tomatoes. But keeping track of some of this in your own notes can kind of help you plan going forward. So here's some of the things you can choose for cool seasons. So these are the things you might want to start looking for. Start thinking about getting ordered or know the source of it. So in the next uh, 4 to 6 weeks, you can start thinking about planning and getting ready to plant for these cool season. So those hardy ones, those can stand some frost. Moderately hardy, killing frost will definitely get them, but a little light frost is not likely to get them. In fact, it's recommended that the moderately hardy crops be planted about 2 weeks before that frost-free date, like potatoes. So you can go 4 to 6 weeks before that last frost with lettuce, spinach, cabbage, mustard, kale, peas, and so on. So it's getting close to time to plant these. So let's look at this real quick. You've decided that, well, let's take April 16th is the last frost date. You're going to plant lettuce grown from seed. It's going to take 35 days to get to a harvest, and this is in the spring. So we just count back 4, 6 weeks. So sometime between the 5th of March and the 19th of March would be the window that you'd want to plant your lettuce at the earliest. So you can plant, back up and count plant. Let's look at this one, another one. We're going to plant a fall crop this time. So 50% chance of frost on the 22nd of October, 35 days again. We're going to add a few days because they're just going to be a little slower growing at in the fall than they were in the spring. So 45 days back. So that means we can plant around the 9th of September and still expect a crop before we have a really hard killing frost. It would probably even take out some of our cool season. So even as late as the 23rd, we could probably plant and still have a good fall crop. We can do the same thing with our worm season, beans, cucumbers, so on, pumpkins, watermelons. So watermelons, tomatoes, uh, peppers, some of those things we sometimes start indoors. So we can use the same principle. When's the last frost date that we, have? There's a 90% frost-free date is the 28th, so that's probably the date we want to look. It's going to take 55 days for those beans to come to harvest, so we need to plant, about the time we pay our taxes. So when you read the packets, read the catalogs, you can start using this information and you can select some varieties then that, kind of fits the window of when you want to harvest and decide when you need those plants and get your order or start purchasing. We can look at, here's a fall example for getting those last zucchini. You've not had enough zucchini, so you're going to be planting more. So it's 50 days to harvest. 22nd of October again is our last chance of days. About 10 days for slower growth. So we can plant those in August, around the 10th of August, and still have some zucchini in the fall of the year. You can do that with some of the other crops as well. So things that's going to affect how quickly those crops come in, of course, would be soil conditions, uh, temperature, how you're planting. Is it seed or transplant? And how long will it take to mature? What kind of planting are you going to have? You're going to be conservative or you're going to plant a lot? And then there may be some opportunities we won't discuss tonight for season extension. So you can see a lot of possibilities here. So when you think about this, you know, you can you can select varieties for a lot of different reasons. And as I said, there's a lot of choices with these varieties and a lot of things to consider. But I think the biggest thing is to think about, what do I like? What varieties that I've tried in the past that I like? What are the conditions under which I'm growing them? So, the length of maturity may come into play. So if you're in the higher elevations around here, for some of the crops that you might want to grow in the fall, you might want a quicker maturing variety. Then, so if you got a choice of when it's 40 days to maturity and when it's 45, 50 days to maturity, you might try go with the 40-day maturity, just to ensure that you have that crop in before the frost. Somebody asked collards and hardiness. Tell you what, collard greens are pretty hardy. They can be pretty hardy. Um, Most of your greens, turnip greens, turnips, mustards, kale, some of those, some of those are a little more hardy than others, but it's going to take a good, what I'd call a killing frost. That's when everything, the truck, the porch, the grass, everything is just white before it really uh, knocks them back. And a lot of times they'll even survive those killing frosts. It just may not have any growth until the soil temperature and the air temperature starts coming back in the spring of the year. And you may see regrowth with those. Yeah, somebody said, go ahead and think about when you're buying your varieties and mapping out what you want and selecting your varieties. Sometimes these catalogs and companies sell out of varieties, particularly if they're a popular variety. So when you place an order, particularly seed, if it's for this growing season, you can buy enough seed to do a spring plant and a fall plant, and it still be viable over the course of that short period. So you may want to think about, am I going to be buying or planting this crop for a second time and buying enough seed all at one time for the season? You all can unmute yourselves, maybe just one at a time if you have questions. It might be easier than me trying to read these uh, chats that are coming in.
Sheldon, I have a question.
Okay.
This is Vicky Patterson again. Um, what would you recommend for, you mentioned like a lot of people like to raise tomatoes. I love tomatoes. My husband and I like the grape tomatoes as snacks. But what would you recommend for somebody who I've planted things in the past? I've planted onions, sweet peppers, tomatoes, and by the end of the season, they're all dead. Um, for somebody that like doesn't know what the heck they're doing, maybe is there a plant that you can't kill? Shut up, Terry.
Love you, girl.
Uh, no, I don't know if there's one you can't kill. Um, I guess the question is that I would ask is, what exactly is going on? You said you named a variety of different things, none of which are technically related to each other, which if everything is dying in your garden, onions, tomatoes, peppers, beans, everything, that would lead me to think not disease or insect, but a
Neglect.
soil issue or maybe just a nutrient issue or maybe a moisture issue, and not getting enough moisture. And you may be watering or what you think's enough, and depending on your soil type, it may not be enough. If you've got a coarser textured soil and water can move through it a lot quicker than a finer texture soil. So it would move away from the plant quicker. So you may have to water just a little more frequently. If you've got what I have, then you drill a hole in it and pour the water in and hope that it seeps in because it's hard clay.
Yeah, understood.
So
And you can do a soil test through the state. And especially for people who are on a place where they're starting a garden, it really is invaluable to have a soil test done to know what you're working with.
Okay.
I would also recommend that you do that regularly, even if you have an established garden. How often regularly is that may depend. I've had gardeners that would soil test their right after the opening a new area for like 2, 3 years, 3 years, I think they did in a row. At second and third soil test, they wanted a lot of variety in it, so they skipped a year, and
Okay.
it did not change between the third test and the fourth test. So they went to like a 2 year rotation. Every couple of years they would soil test. And if you are amending the soil with anything, whether it be a commercial fertilizer or compost, or your neighbors cleaned out their horse barn and you're getting all the manure and putting on the garden, I would still soil test, because and I've had 2 incidents in the last couple of years. One, he did exactly what his daddy always did. The same type of fertilizer, the same way every year until something quit growing.
Hmm.
And when we soil tested, his phosphorus was extremely high and his potassium was almost adequate. It was just so out of balance. So I told him to abandon that spot for his tomatoes and grow his wife likes sunflowers, which are heavy feeders. They grow quite a bit of sweet corn, which are heavy feeders. So he planted sunflowers and sweet corn in that section in the old garden for about 2, 3 years. And he said the other day, things are this year did better in that section than they did before. He just had it. In all honesty, you can have a soil that has too much nutrients. And the other case that came up, they weren't using any type of commercial fertilizer. They were actually using compost, and they were making their own compost from leaves and kitchen parings. And I think they may have had some manure from horse uh, chickens or something. And they kept it every year. They put on the compost. Put about an inch or so of compost on, work it in, and they were getting where things were a little too uh, high in nutrients. You look at that soil test results, it's going to show, and we'll talk about soil tests somewhere along the way. It's on the list. You're going to have levels. You're going to have low, medium, high, and very high in these nutrients. And I tell folks, if we have low, we've got some work to do. If we have medium, all we're going to do is maintain it. We're going to try to find a way to give the plants exactly what they need, and the soil's got enough, use the soil as a reserve. If we're getting into the high, then we're probably not going to be amending anything. We get into the very high, we start seeing some issues. And it gets kind of technical. Calcium and phosphorus are very similar in their atomic makeup. So if you have too high phosphorus, the plant starts taking phosphorus up, and just it's there, and we'll just take it in. It will just, it's plenty of it at the expense of calcium. So, and it needs, all these nutrients. We have the major nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium they use in large quantities. Then you have calcium and magnesium, manganese, iron, and there's like 10 of them on that list. And depending on the plant, some of them are a little more important than others. They don't use as much of those, but if any one of those is lacking or the plant's not utilizing it right, it doesn't grow. So a soil test is a good way to know where you are and what adjustments you need to make.
I think
I s-
someone was, well, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sheldon.
No, someone was what?
Somebody had made a comment about her plants dying because in August it just got so hot to get out there and water. And one of the things we are going to talk about in a later program is setting up things like irrigation to make that a lot easier and simpler. And so that will be coming.
Yeah. So yeah, some irrigation options might be good. And well, let's think about that statement as well. So August, we do have some pretty hot, dry weather, and it can be a little more difficult to get things to grow. So we choose varieties that hopefully will be in before that hot, dry period. Take August off when it is too hot and dry for much to grow. And then late August, we're starting to think about some of those cool season, uh, the next round of cool season crops. So again, that's just a matter of planning, looking at maturity dates, selecting some varieties, and we might be able to not have a lot growing in August during that period when things are a little more difficult to maintain. I'd aimed for an hour and we're 15 minutes past that. So I'm still open for questions, but feel free if you want to hop off and have other things you want to do to do so. And I don't have my calendar in front of me, but in that email that most of you probably saw an email from me because you're on my mailing list. I recognized a lot of names uh, when you all started signing up from that email list where I send out some regular information. But we will be having another session on the 16th of February. We'll dive a little deeper into soil testing and site preparation at that time. And one of the things I was looking at is I was putting materials together for this and sorting out between this session and the next one is, thinking about things like do we till or not till? Uh, Soil testing, making sure we've got access to things like water. So we'll talk about all that at the February 16th. Um, two things real quick. Let me find the chat, and I will send this in an email as well. But I do have a quick survey that you all can, don't have to do it while we are online. You can log off and answer this, and I will send a reminder email for this as well. So, oh, we're got too many screens. There we go. So here's the link for the survey.
But you also sent it in the follow-up email.
And I'll send it in a follow-up email.
Okay.
And that may be uh, I'll try to do it before we leave. I leave here tonight, but I will send a follow-up email. I tell you what, the follow-up email may be tomorrow evening because when I shut this thing off, it's going to start thinking for a few minutes. I did record this, and I will
Okay.
save it and put it where it can be found and send you all the link to that. So I'll send you the survey and the link to the to all this at the same time. So any other questions?
Nope. I'm good. Thank you, Sheldon.
You're more than welcome.
Sheldon.
Great program.
All right. Well, I'll see you all later.
All right. Good night, Sheldon. Thank
Night.
you.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Sheldon.